Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out an inverter from Junbpaw. And this inverter is like none I have ever reviewed before. So let's go and open it up and see what we have. Alright, the first thing you'll see is a Cat 5e patch cord for communication. You'll also see a set of conductors, and the user's manual, and a quick product introduction. There's also a box right here. Let's go ahead and open that up. And that is the Junbpaw remote control for the inverter. This is where you'll connect your Cat 5e connection. And then we have the inverter. So you might be asking yourself, Jim, what's so special about this inverter? Well, first of all, it's a 2080 watt inverter, but look right here. It does 24 and 48 volt input from the battery. And then it outputs 120 volts AC. Pure sine wave inverter. And from my understanding, you can just connect up a 24 volt battery system or a 48 volt battery system and it will automatically configure itself to work with it. So let's go ahead and grab a couple of batteries and get this thing wired up. Alright, so before I wire this up, let me show you a little bit about the unit. First of all, it does say Junbpaw on the front, 2080 watt pure sine wave inverter, auto transfer 24 to 48 volts DC. On the back, you will see your positive and negative battery connections along with two cooling fans and your grounding plug right here. And on this side, you will have your, right here, you have your three-way switch. You can either turn the unit on manually, you can leave it in the middle where it is turned off, or you can push it down and it will be turned on and off by the remote. Right here is the connection for the remote. We also have a power light right here. We also have two 15 amp AC outputs right here. And then right here we have a hardwire connection, because this is not just an inverter. It's actually an inverter slash automatic transfer switch. That's what the ATS stands for. And what that means is that we're going to be connecting this up to a battery. And in this example, what we're going to be using is two 24 volt batteries. The first connection will be a 24 volt connection by putting these in parallel, making it a 24 volt 100 amp hour battery. And the second example will be a 40 volt configuration by connecting these in series, thus making a 48 volt 50 amp hour battery. No matter how we connect these batteries up, whether it being a 24 volt configuration or a 48 volt configuration, it will always still be the same watt hour capacity, which will be 2560 watt hours. Okay, and to make our 24 volt configuration with these two 24 volt batteries, we'll need to put them in parallel. That means we're connecting the positives of each together and the negatives of each together, and then we'll connect the inverter, the negative of the inverter to the negative of this battery, and the positive of the inverter to the positive of this battery. That way it pulls from both of the batteries equally. So I'm going to go ahead and wire this up and we'll get these tests started. Alright, well I have the Junbpaw 24 volt version set up, and let me just go ahead and show you what the voltage of our battery bank is currently. You can see that it is 26.64 volts because these batteries have been charged up to 100%. You can see that my wiring setup looks pretty ugly because I just grabbed some wires along with the ones that came with the unit. The ones that came with the unit are these right here, and they are 5 gauge wire. They can handle about 95 amps, I believe, safely. And that means that they can handle about 2400 watts. So this is a 2080 watt inverter, so these wires are actually correct for this size of inverter, which I really appreciate. And I also have some 4 gauge wire connecting the two batteries together to make a 100 amp hour 25.6 volt battery bank. Now if you're going to put a fuse on here, you always want to fuse the wiring that is the smallest. That's how you want to rate your fuse size. So since this 5 gauge wire can handle about 95 amps, I would probably put about a 125 amp fuse on the wires going to the inverter. This being a 24 volt setup or a 48 volt setup, it does not matter the voltage. It matters what the amperage size of your wiring is. That's what you're trying to protect, your wiring. You're not trying to protect your batteries or your inverter. You're trying to protect your wires from burning up and causing fire. I also have the remote control plugged into the remote setup right here. But first, let's go ahead and power it on and see what we see just by the switch. All right, you can see that the remote control did turn on. It does show 26.4 volts right up here. It shows 120 volts of AC. And it shows that we have a full battery gauge right here. That is probably going by voltage. So that won't really be true for lithium iron phosphate batteries. And it also does show a pure sine wave symbol right up here. On the bottom, it also shows how much wattage is currently being used by the inverter. And right now, since we have nothing plugged in, it is 0. All right, the first thing I do want to show is that I've got a few probes actually plugged into the unit right down there. And that it is actually 120 volts coming out of the AC. And the AC is pure sine wave right there. So far, everything looks really good. And when it comes to standby consumption of the inverter, we are looking at about 0.45 amps. And so that would be between 11 and 12 watts of standby consumption. So the first thing we're going to do is try to power up our 1000 watt Elite Gourmet hot plate. And we're just going to run that for a little bit to see what the sine wave looks like, to see if the voltage goes down at all, anything out of the ordinary. And then I also have a shop vac on the ground. So after maybe 30 seconds of running this, I'm going to turn this shop vac on and we're going to try to monitor how much wattage we're getting out of all of that, including the peak wattage, because this actually can handle up to 4,000 watts of peak for only a couple of seconds. But let's go ahead and turn the heat plate on and see what happens. All right, heat plate is on. Our sine wave looks very clean still, and it does show that we are using 940 watts of electricity there, and on our watt meter, it does show 952 watts. It also shows the AC voltage is right at 119 volts and that our batteries are at 25.8 volts. So running this 1000 watt load, everything seems very good. But let's see what happens when we turn on the shop vac right here. Is it gonna shut the unit down or is it gonna keep running? All right, I don't know if you can see that, but here we go. 3, 2, 1, go. All right, well, that was pretty impressive. As you can see, our wattage got up to 1962 watts on that initial startup of the shop vac. And I did not hear or feel any kind of dullness to the power of the shop vac. I mean, it was like it was plugged right into the wall. So that is, I like that. That's very nice. One thing I didn't look for was the sine wave though. So let me run this again just to look at the sine wave. I would say so far this thing is handling everything just fine on the 24 volt setup. All right, and another thing I want to show you is how much amperage is actually coming out of the 24 volt battery bank when we run these two items right here, right around 1950 watts. So let's go ahead and turn on the Elite Gourmet again. And that gives us right around probably 950 to 1,000 watts. And we are getting 40.6 amps coming out of the battery. And then let's go ahead and click on our shop vac. All right, and you can see that when we ran that 1000-watt Elite Gourmet, it jumped up to 40 amps, pretty much 40 or 41 amps coming through those wires, which is perfectly safe for this setup. And then when we kicked on that shop vac, it bumped it up to around 87 to 89 amps going through those wires, which is really the max that you should be doing. And when I kicked it on, it showed that it jumped all the way up to 125 amps. So your 125 amp fuse would be able to handle that just fine for that small surge. So let's go ahead and wire these batteries up to a 48 volt configuration. So instead of having a positive to positive connection and a negative to negative connection, what we'll have is just the negative to positive connection, and then we'll have the positive and the negative going to the inverter, thus making it a series connection. All right, well now I have my battery bank wired as a 48 volt battery bank. Again, I have my positive and negative connections tied together with this wire, thus making it 24 plus 24 equals 48 volts. And then I have my positive and my negative going to the inverter. This time we're going to go ahead and turn the inverter on with the remote. So we'll move this to the down arrow, and then we'll use the remote to turn it on. And right there it does show 48 volts, and the voltage of the battery, it shows to be 53.1. And if we do a voltage check at the terminals, mine shows 52.94, so pretty close. Let's go ahead and do an amp draw while this inverter is on standby to see how much amperage is being used in 48 volts. And you can see that the amp draw on standby is only 0.25 amps. And when you multiply 0.25 by 53.1 being the volts, you do get 13.2 watts. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run this test again. We're going to go ahead and power up this 1000-watt Elite Gourmet. And we're going to run this shop vac down here, and I want to show you the difference in amperage going through these wires in order to power that much equipment. We are right at 0.25 amps of standby. Let's go ahead and turn on the Elite Gourmet. Now that we're in a 48 volt configuration, you can see we're only using 20.5 amps to run a 1000-watt load. So let's go ahead and turn on the shop vac. And with running the shop vac, we got it up to about 42 to 43 amps coming into this inverter from the 48 volt battery setup. So that right there can kind of show you that your wiring can be significantly reduced in size if you decide to go with the 48 volt version of this setup. So we know that it can handle 1900 watts, but I want to know what happens when you throw like 3000 watts on this. It says that it should shut off within like 3 seconds. So I'm going to go ahead and grab another 1000 watts worth of power. We're going to try to load it all up and see what happens. All right, so I pulled out my NUWAVE induction cooktop, and I also brought out a 500 watt heater. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and light up the Elite Gourmet, give it 1000 watts. Then we're going to light up the 500 watt heater, and that should boost us up to about 1500 watts. And then we're going to start kicking up the induction cooktop, first with 600 watts, then 900 watts, then all the way up to 1300 watts. And we're going to see how long it can handle doing this. So let's begin. First, the Elite Gourmet. And again, we are pulling about 20.8 amps. So let's go ahead and turn on the heater. All right, the heater is now on. And our watt meter is showing 1435 watts from the Elite Gourmet and the heater. And our monitor here is showing 1380. So the monitor is showing a little less than what our voltmeter is showing, or our watt meter. All right, so let's go ahead and kick it on 600 watts. max sear, and start. We are now at 1985 watts on this meter right here. And we are pulling right at 45 amps. It shows that our battery is down to 50.9 volts, and the AC voltage is still 119 volts. So let's go ahead and move this up to 900 watts. The inverter is now beeping because of probably our battery voltage is getting a little low. We're pulling 2280 watts, and our amperage is 52 amps coming out of the batteries. Now it says it can go over wattage up to about 2400 watts for about a minute before it shuts off. So it might be shutting off in a minute. But I want to see what happens when we push this all the way to 1300 watts. So let's go ahead and do it now. We're at 14, 2500, 26, and it shut down. And on the screen it showed OLP, which means overload protection. And you could hear it just doing a constant beep. Once you turn it off and turn it back on, it does reset the unit. So the inverter did exactly what it's supposed to do. So far, I really like this. But next, we're going to go ahead and try the automatic transfer switch feature, which means we're going to plug this into the wall and plug in a couple of devices and see if they stay on when I unplug it from the wall and the power switches over to the batteries. So let me go ahead and get this wired up, and we'll start that test. All right, to wire this up so I can plug it into the wall, I will be using just your basic 16 gauge extension cord. If you're going to make this a permanent solution and you're going to go with an extension cord, you want to go with a 12 gauge cord. Something that looks more like this extension cord right here. This cord can handle 20 amps, and that's what it's designed for. And that's what the AC input can handle on this inverter is 20 amps. So make sure you use the correct cord to be able to handle all the wattage that this inverter can deliver. For this demonstration, I'm going to be using this 16 gauge cord, but I'll know that I'm not going to be using this permanently, and also the load that I'm going to be passing through this cord will not go over the amperage that this cord can handle. I'll only be pushing about 500 to 700 watts through this cord, which is just fine. So let me go ahead and zoom you in and I'll show you exactly how you wire this up. All right, after you unscrew this plate and take it off, here's what you'll see. You'll see your AC out section, which means that you can actually hardwire this to a sub panel or something like that. And you have your line, neutral, and ground on this side. And this side is your AC in. This is the side that I'm going to be using for this demonstration. And I'll be connecting the ground, the line, and the neutral right here. All right, I've got my AC plug wired up with my ground, my live, and my neutral. Make sure you give them a tug so they're nice and secure. And then we'll put our protection plate back on. All right, so let's go ahead and plug this into the wall. I have this connected to a watt meter so we can actually see what's coming out of the wall at any time. All right, we plugged it in and you can see that it says 0 watts because the inverter isn't on. So let's go ahead and turn our inverter on. And the inverter still shows 53.1 volts coming out of the batteries and 121 volts now. Now I do notice that without any kind of load, we still have some creeping amperage coming out of the batteries. On the 48 volt setting, it's still 0.17 amps. I would have thought that would be 0 because we are plugged into the wall. And the only reason that concerns me is that these batteries could get slowly depleted just by being wired up to the inverter, even though the inverter is plugged into the wall. All right, so let's go ahead and turn on a load, which is going to be that 500 watt heater right there, and see what happens. Okay, the heater is turned on. And you can see that the batteries are actually drawing 0.6 amps. And the wall is actually powering 470 watts. So yeah, we are pulling 454 watts. That's what the unit shows right there. But I do notice that we are still pulling about a half an amp from our battery bank. So let's see what happens when I unplug this from the wall. We'll see if the heater does anything weird. But it says that it should be able to transfer in under 15 milliseconds. So let's do it. All right, unplugging from the wall in 3, 2, 1. And I'm sure that you instantly saw that the batteries switched over, and now we are pulling 10.3 amps from the battery bank. So let's go ahead and plug it back in and see what happens. All right, plugging back in 3, 2, 1. And you can see that our amp meter shows that we're back down to 0.5 amps, but everything on this is working exactly the way that they described. So what do I think of the 2080 watt automatic transfer switch / inverter from Junbpaw? Well, through all my testing, this thing performed very well. It uses around between 11 and 13 watts of standby power based on if you're using 24 volts or 48 volts. I love the fact that you can use 24 or 48 volt battery configurations. That makes it very versatile. It was able to power up those 2000 watt loads with absolutely no issue, even when running a 1000 watt hot plate and then kicking on basically a 900 watt shop vac. It had no issues with it. The automatic transfer switch of this unit worked flawlessly in my opinion. Now I just want to make sure that everyone knows that this is an automatic transfer switch. It is not an inverter charger. So it will not charge your battery bank while it's plugged into the wall. It was not designed to do that. And from what my testing reveals is that it looks like it does pull a little bit of amperage from your battery bank even though it's plugged into the wall. So you'll still need to maintain your batteries either with a solar charge controller or just with a 24 or 48 volt battery charger, depending on how your batteries are wired up. So if you have any questions about the Junbpaw 2080 watt inverter with automatic transfer switch, please go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'll have a link to this item and everything else I used in my description, just in case you want to look further into it. Thanks again and have a great day. Bye-bye.